Hi, I'm Catherine Llewellyn, the host of the podcast. You can find out all about Truth and Transcendence on truthandtranscendence.com. And you can find out all about me on beingspace.world, where you will find my online coaching offering as well as my UK-based workshops. The Freedom of Spirit workshop for liberation and empowerment, the Pellower Radical Shift in Consciousness workshop for spiritual expansion, and transformational coaching for exploring the mind-body-spirit connection on the expansive path. You can also support the podcast by actually making a donation. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Today, I'm delighted to welcome to Truth and Transcendence special guest, Alexandra Beller, who's going to talk about all sorts of things, but we're going to start with deep sensitivity. And I will just say, before I do say something about Alexandra, these days a lot of people talk about people being highly sensitive, and when they say that, they're sort of sounding as if they mean that there's something wrong with that person, or that person has kind of special needs in some way. But in the energy healing space, which is a space I am in a lot, these people are high sensitives. They're the ones who, if they have an attunement, they get it 300% instantly in their whole body and spirit. So they're like the elite. So I'm very tuned into this deep respect for deep sensitivity. And I'm really excited that Alexandra's coming on and that this is one of the things she's really happy to talk about. So Alexandra, MFA CMA, is a choreographer, director, and educator, blending somatics, inquiry, and creative freedom. A former member of the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Dance Company, she leads Alexandra Beller Dances and has created 40-plus international works. I've seen some of them, absolutely stunning. She has taught at Princeton, Barnard, Yale, Rutgers, and is core faculty at the Laban Institute. Alexandra is the author of The Embodied Conductor and The Anatomy of Art, which, with the date of 2026, I take it is yet to come out, supporting artists in deepening process and possibility. And you can find Alexandra on alexandrabellerdances.org. And that's AlexandraBellerDances, alexandrabellerdances.org. So Alexandra, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I've been watching some of your videos of you dancing and of you teaching, and I think it's obvious from that you can see that person has a very deep sensitivity. So would you like to kick off by sharing with us a little bit when you first came to understand this notion of deep sensitivity?
I think it's been a slow burn of understanding, and I think it has paralleled society's reckoning with it and talking about it. So I think as it was becoming more present and discussed in culture, it also became more obvious to me that this is what I've always been living inside. So I wouldn't say that I had any kind of big flash of revelation. I think I'd always been a sensitive kid and trafficked in a lot of empathy. And of course, that is not unusual in a household where there was some neglect from your parents, because you are tuning in to see what the vibe is. But there wasn't really abuse. So, I don't feel like it was one of those situations where I was, constantly trying to figure out what was about to happen. It was more that I was alone a lot when I was a kid. And I do think there's something about that aloneness that has a part to play in how this developed. But even as a dancer, young dancer, I often noticed certain things in my body that felt like teachers felt like they were discussing things in very generic ways. And I would be feeling this very specific bone or direction or the inner physics of dance. And it was odd to me that I never heard teachers talking about the kind of detail that I felt in my body. And then when I started teaching, I started noticing that I would say, you can feel, this leads to this, or you can feel that, when your shoulder blade does this, your spine does that. I would be talking about details that I felt in my body and just looking out at the room with seeing these blank faces. And I started to realize, it was probably now about 15 years ago, like, I think I might feel things that other people are not feeling as frequently. Um, so that started me on more of an inner journey, and that coincided with the introduction of somatics as a really specific, focused practice in my life. And then I would notice when I would go to body workers that things seemed, of course you're just you on the table. You don't know what other people do on the table. But then you start to get feedback, or I started to get feedback from different healers and body workers like, whoa, nobody ever felt that, or I'd say, I'd be in acupuncture and say, well, weird, I feel like this tapping behind my ear. Is that normal? And they'd be like, yeah, that's the end of the meridian, but I don't have a needle there. That's cool. And I had just a lot of these experiences with body workers where either they would feel, wow, your energy in your body, whatever their practice was, or I'd say, oh, I feel this or I feel that. Yeah, I've never had anybody say they felt that, but that's cool because that's your kidney one. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like there's like somebody unplugged something at the sole of my foot and there's like air rushing out, like a little valve got, and they're like, yeah, that's your wind. Um, and so like lots of really kind of fun exchanges with healers and practitioners where in some ways I could be proof of concept, for things that can feel theoretical to them and conceptual. And of course they believe it. But I think it can be nice to have a body in front of you saying, no, yeah, I feel that. Yeah, back of my skull, right? And then the way my tail, yeah, I feel that. And so that just became a really fun, interesting exchange. And then when I started doing more healing work on my own, I realized how porous my system was. And it actually made me leave. I was doing hospice massage for a while, but I have such a thin boundary, and I can shore it up and firm it up. But I felt like I had such a thin boundary that working in this very profound and sad place, I was working on people as they were, making their way, transitioning out of life. And their 6-year-old daughter would be playing in the corner and their husband would be down the hall. And I'm, holding this head of this mother, and just like the devastation that I could feel in my body was really more than I wanted to continue to hold. And I just really don't enjoy shoring myself up. Like I don't like living that way. And I was like, I know I could, make firmer boundaries and continue to do this work, but it's not really the way I wanted to live. So the clients that I see, I make the conscious choice to say, like, yeah, I'm going to let you in. I'm going to let you take some space inside me. I'm going to get to know you from inside my body. I'm not doing the, traditional practitioner healer distancing. There's nothing wrong with that traditional, relationship, but it's just not me. And so I made a conscious choice to invest in it and just say, yeah, this is my practice. I let you in for a little while. I get to know you from the inside. I feed back some of what came up. I hear what came up for you. We talk about those two stories together.
Amazing. Beautiful. Wow. I mean, I feel like I could write a book from what you've just said, because some of those points, like that last point about the whole boundary thing, about being porous. I think you're absolutely right. There is this perhaps an assumption, which is that if you are very sensitive, that you must learn to shore up the boundaries and then you must engage in that way. And also because you're sensitive and therefore able to contribute something to people, which otherwise you might not be able to, therefore you should be doing that. And I think it's admirable that you've chosen not to do that, because you've chosen to actually live as you are and not suppress who you are. And from that place, I feel sure, your life is probably going to be longer and more enjoyable, right? But also you are still really helping the people who are in the right place to come in and be with you. Because we need different things at different times, don't we? We're ready for different things at different times.
Yeah.
You remind me of a friend of mine who's very much a high sensitive. And she's had many, many years of just trying to keep going in the shoring up. And it's taken its toll.
Yeah.
You know,
I prefer to spend that energy, that kind of in Laban we talk about flow being about control, and either I'm applying some control or I'm releasing control. And so that formation of the boundary is a version of bound flow. It's like an energetic control. I prefer to use that aspect of control in who I choose to be around, and then let myself not have to have that kind of bound flow to my like energetic field in my body. So essentially, I try to keep myself in the safest spaces possible. And that doesn't mean like no strangers, and it doesn't mean no trauma. But it does mean I'm fairly judicious with who I choose to mentor and be a practitioner with.
yeah.
And I can do other forms of mentorship that are less physical and less energetic exchange. And I certainly do that. And I can have pretty intellectual mentorship experiences with people. I still like get hits about them and, information about them, but it's not quite so bodily. But if somebody's in like physical proximity to me, I'm gonna need to trust that I can let their energy into my body.
Now, some people listening might think that if you are consciously choosing who you're working with and not choosing to work with the people where you would have to, let's say, protect yourself in that way, some people might assume that you are therefore playing it safe and not stretching yourself. Now, I'm guessing that's not true. Would you like to say something about that?
Well, I'm not sure what the to me, I'm curious what the stretch would be. Like more trauma or more grief in the room to me is not a direction that feels like that's not my goal to stretch in that way. Resilience is not my goal. I've already practiced resilience my whole life. That's not my goal for the last whatever third of my life. I do absolutely stretch and grow myself, but actually the sense of like it's safe to let this person into your field and really receive them and like get witchy with it and like let your intuition really bubble up. That does feel like stretching and growing, but I do that best in a situation that feels safe to me. And the safety is just like, this is not going to activate my own deep, deep, deep pain and emotion, right? Like I still want to keep myself secure on the inside. And when I'm holding the body of someone who's about to pass out of this life, and that I know is a mom, which I am as well, and my system is just feeling her devastation at leaving her kid, that I don't have any boundaries inside that can protect me from how sad that is to me. And I found that would stay with me all night and into the next day. And I would go home and try to take care of my kids. And I felt kind of useless to take care of them because I was so sad. And that to me doesn't feel like growing. That just feels like surviving. I already know how to do that. But to me, the deep work is like, if I put myself in a safe space with somebody, how deep can I go with them? Because I'm in trust and I'm in flow. And I'm not trying to control the situation. So I feel like the times that I grow the most and learn the most is when I feel like I'm with a companion person that is not so activating to me.
Beautiful. I think, thank you very much for articulating that. That's what I hoped you would kind of share, because I think sometimes we think if we're not pushing ourselves to go outside of where we feel safe, we are therefore then staying safe and not really growing. which, as you explained, is not true. In fact, the growth that you're describing, that you're doing in your work, is probably a lot more profound than the growth to practice yet again being resilient.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that it feels safe when I'm in that deep place. It still feels like, whoa, what's happening? This is a lot of information. What is this? What's going on? I feel a lot of responsibility. It does feel still scary and breathless and like, I have, like there's a lot going on here and I need to figure this out to be able to support this person. So just because the environment feels safe doesn't mean I'm playing it safe. Just like you can be in a relationship with somebody that you really, really trust emotionally, but having a very scary conversation with them. So you're safe environmentally. You feel like this person's not going to turn on me. They're not going to use what I say against me. They're not going to mock me. And so because I feel safe, I'm going to take a big risk, right? So I think that people tend to conflate environmental safety with like risk taking, right? You create safety in the environment so that you can take risks, which is what we do with toddlers, right? We create an environment in which they can really have at it and explore and do anything and take risks. When you take that boundary away from a toddler and you're like, yeah, whatever, you do whatever you want, I'm not even watching you, you see that they suddenly get smaller and they take fewer risks. They take more risks when you create a safe frame for them and fewer risks when everything's open. And so I think that's what I'm doing for myself. I'm creating like a clear frame inside of that. It's very risky.
Beautiful. Love that. Do some of these themes occur in your books, these themes we're talking about at the moment?
Yeah, I am touching, not in the conducting book, because that one's for a very different audience. That one I'm, taking baby steps in somatics with people that generally have had very little exposure to somatics. In my book, The Anatomy of Art, which is about the creative process, I definitely do touch on some of these things. I don't, if there's one thing that my teaching has taught me from that first story, it's that I don't want to make assumptions about what other people feel in their bodies based on what I feel in mine. So, I had to be careful in the book not to use myself always as the litmus test for something, because I really want this to be as, inclusive as possible.
And I'm guessing, does that happen in your work as well? When you're working with people, I'm talking about when you are coaching and training and directing people. And again, I've seen some of these videos and it's just incredible what you're facilitating them to do. Does some of what we've been talking about come into play in those contexts?
Oh, 100%. I process a lot of information, not first through my brain, but first through my body. Like most of the information that I first get about somebody that's in front of me, student or client, or, an actor in a play, is intuitive and embodied. And then my brain starts to try to analyze and figure out what it is that I'm feeling from what I'm seeing. And so there's a translation process inside me. But in general, I'm taking in information very immediately through my body. And then I'm trying to process it through a lot of, academic intellectual rigor.
Right. Okay. Yes. You've got like the primary felt experience and then the making sense of it, that combination. Wow. That sounds like that might be not a very easy thing to do in the moment. Is that something it took a while for you to learn how to do?
No, I think it might be a factor of my neurodivergent brain, but I feel like the boundaries between my different brain mind functions are very thin, so that I can toggle between thinking and feeling and sensing and intuiting back and forth very quickly. It's also something that I feel like the Laban movement analysis work has trained me in.
Yeah. Yes, I had another friend who worked with Laban, and I'd never understood what on earth she was talking about. but having gone and looked at some of your stuff, I now have an inkling of what that is about. Would you like to share with the listeners what the Laban work is?
Sure. So he was an Austro-Hungarian choreographer and musician and really, I think, philosopher, scientist. Um, and he wanted to come up with a system of notation, like music notation, so that you could write human movement down on a piece of paper in a series of symbols. And then for somebody who'd never seen this movement before, could pick up this piece of paper and recreate it, and it would look like the same thing, right? Which is what we do with music. The notation itself for me is not the exciting part, though that's a whole field of study that many people get very excited about. For me, what's exciting is that in order to create that notation system, he had to analyze all of human movement and towards meaning. So he analyzed what the body is doing, where in space it's doing it, how, with what quality, dynamic, sensation, feeling it's doing it. And then even a more intangible why we think it's doing it. Like, is the body moving just for itself? Is it moving to land somewhere? Or is it moving to interact and negotiate and adapt and relate to the environment? So there are these 4 categories: body, effort, shape, and space. And then inside each category, we're breaking down some aspect of human movement. But it's not just like a neutral, objective, what is that body doing? There is a very strong container of why, like for what purpose? What's the meaning? And you are always trying to understand, like, why is this body doing that? What's it saying? And I find that quite beautiful. And I like that it does a few different things. One, I think it neutralizes some of our opinion and bias and judgment when we watch each other. It takes down some of that loaded language we might use about each other. So I might, see a dance phrase and somebody might say, well, that's a very aggressive phrase. Well, aggressive is a lot of ideas put together, and you're painting that person with an agenda that's not necessarily true. It's forceful movement. It's quick movement. It's very direct movement. But so is when you see a friend that you haven't seen for 5 years, so might be your hug, and your might also be forceful and quick and direct, right? And it's not aggressive. So that way that we sometimes go quickly into conflating a quality or a dynamic with an idea, that's an assumption. It's really nice. Laban kind of slices into that and allows you to stay in just, oh, this is what I saw. What do you make up out of that? Well, that's a different question. Still an important question, but a separate question, so that we're not just painting people right away with, like, you seem this, and putting some of our associations and maybe negative stereotypes onto those qualities, right? So if we grew up with a parent who was also quick and used a lot of force and was very direct, but was abusive, then we have very strong associations with those qualities. Laban can allow you to separate and say, okay, but also, like, these beautiful, like, there's a marching band that practices in the park across the street. I'm watching them. Yeah. Quick and forceful and direct. And they're like so full of life and pride and making music. And like, can I see those qualities in these kids and separate a little bit from that particular association?
Oh, I love that. I would like everyone to learn that immediately now, all over the world. Because you're right, we do. And particularly with movement, I mean, a lot of people are just not connected to their body at all, or anyone's body. I used to joke that people think their body is like a sort of a trolley to carry their brain from one place to another.
Yeah.
That's what people use it for. So have you found this connection with the sensitivity that you have and the way that you have found your way into doing the somatic work? And then I love that combination where you said about all the different mind functions. Sounds like they're able to cooperate with each other very sort of seamlessly, which is extraordinary, awesome. Have you found that you are able to kind of teach some of that to some of your students?
Yeah, and I do talk about that quite a lot in the Anatomy of Art. One thing that I teach often to artists is not so much the four Jungian functions of, thinking, feeling, sensing, intuiting, but more like two functions of the brain, which is like intuition, uh, um, instinct, reflex, embodiment, and analysis, objectivity, research, rigor, uh, thoughtfulness, and both of them essential qualities for creative process and artists, which is a lot of my audience. But they don't play well together, right? So if we're in that like dreamy, feely, I don't know, but I want to see this on stage. And can we try that? And it's crazy. And it's got the playfulness to it. And it's got a flow to it. And it's got a like fantastical quality, right? And we can interrupt that with that analytical part of the brain, often through the voice of an inner critic, "Well, what are we doing here? And how are you using a rehearsal time? And this isn't what you said you'd do. And I don't know where this is going." And right. And of course, like what quicker way would we have to shut down that beautiful childlike, playful flow, which for many artists is where some of their most magical ideas have come from if they let themselves stay in that place. And then the opposite is also true. At a certain point in your process, many points in your process, you need to use that big brain in a different way. And you need to say, "Yeah, I love that solo, but we don't need it. It's too long and it's dragging the tempo down." And, that other part of your brain can come in and be like, "But it's so pretty, and but we work on it for so long, and but Cheryl is going to be so sad if she doesn't do that solo. And but we paid for all that rehearsal time, and now we're throwing away what we made, and that's a waste of money." And those kind of sentimental or tuggy little feelings, they don't work well with that analytical brain, which needs to be a little more dispassionate and say, "I hear you." And, we will absolutely talk to Cheryl about, her feelings about cutting this section. And maybe we'll save it for something else or whatever, but it's not going in the piece because I'm prioritizing the piece for all of us, and I'm not gonna get into feeding somebody's ego and making a worse piece of art that person is in, like that doesn't help them. So I think I teach artists a lot about choosing which brain function you're in terms of instinct or analysis and trying to hold firm for it. And if the other one starts poking in at you, gently just say like, not right this second, please. I will talk to you later. You absolutely have a role to play here, but not now. And so being able to say not now to the other brain function is really useful for artists.
I bet it is. Do you find that the people who come work with you tend to already have quite a strong connection with the instinct side in general?
Not necessarily. It might be curious to listeners who maybe don't identify as artists, how many artists identify as analytical, intellectual, like cerebral forward people, and like rehearsal plans and research, and like this is going to be this, and things need to match each other and meet each other. And for those people, I'm like, what does your body feel when you see your piece? What do you want? Like, what, forget about what you thought this was about. And other people, I have to bring them more into analysis. I find few people who have a pretty equal leverage between those two sides of their brain. And one thing I do really love about the Laban and Bartenieff work is that it can bring you into the side that's not your happy place.
Yes, you're helping them to bring up whichever side it is that could do with a little bit of encouragement and love,
Yeah.
because you've explored them both very fully.
Yeah, and I would say that instinct intuition side was much more prevalent for, the first more than half of my life. And then grad school and my CMA, studying the Laban work and becoming a teacher really had to bring in that analysis in a way that has been so useful because it has allowed me to catalyze all of that intuition and embodiment and actually mold it, sculpt it, shape it, communicate it target it and actually get it out so that it's not just me with myself, but I'm able to articulate it and formulate it and create structures around it. So, I'll do like an opening to class and I'm gathering information about where people are and what they're feeling and what they need. Sometimes I say, what do you want to pick up or what do you want to put down in this class? And, I'm listening, I'm taking in, it's a very intuitive thing. But then very quickly, I have to make something out of that material. So somebody's been saying they don't know where they're going and they feel lost. And I'm like, great. Let's do a walking phrase where we're like doing an improvisation about steps and changing direction and weight shift. And let's like practice foot to pelvis to eye relationship so that every time we take a step, we're feeling very grounded and direct. And then a new step, new direction, and a new step, new direction. But I have to come up with that idea on a dime. So I'm taking in with this intuition, but very quickly I need that analytical brain to like come online and make something clear, coherent, communicable.
Yes. And that example you gave there, that the thing you came up with was an entirely body-based action, which, so I could imagine for people working with you, they don't necessarily see what you're doing in your own process. Because she's saying, maybe I feel lost. And before they know it, you've said, great, let's do this. And they don't know that whole process of multiple steps that you've just been through.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds beautiful. I've actually been in some movement situations where the facilitator was not doing what you're doing exactly, obviously, because what you do is unique. But that feeling of taking the felt experience in the room and working with that rather than saying, okay, that's the felt experience. How do we make it something else? Change it.
And then that quickly following a thread, like the other day in class, in that opening circle, one woman who's she takes my class all the time. She's very loyal. She's been there for years. Very reserved person, rarely shares much in the circle. And she suddenly had quite an outburst and was like, I just, got a huge pay cut in my job, so I had to quit. And I'm feeling like, and she started crying and was obviously having a lot of feeling very tender about it. And then at the end of class, we're all in this improvisation. So everyone's in their own little kind of bubble dancing. And she was having like a very expressive and cathartic dance. And I noticed that most of the rest of the room was like not in such a heightened moment. So I said, Linda, keep dancing, but like, let's gather around and give it just a little bit of support for this expression. And so, everybody gathered around and I had us like doing a little bit of movement. So everyone felt like they were, still in their body and still in movement, but like, why not take a moment to call back to that, opening request? She didn't specifically say, I need support for these feelings, but that's what she's saying if she's bringing it up in a circle, especially someone who rarely brings things up. So, I felt like that was a moment where like the intuition and the, like quickly just come together. And then she reached out afterwards and, expressed that moment had been meaningful to her.
Well, that's so beautiful. So you're actually working then in community as well as just with
Really.
individuals. And when you were describing that, I thought, oh my God, how many times have I or someone I know been in a situation where we're hitting something and we would love it if somebody would just go, hey guys, let's just provide some support here.
Yeah.
So you're giving something that you're sensing is needed.
Yeah. And of course they could not, right? Like I could be wrong. I could have said, let's get around her. And she could have been like, I don't want that. At which point, of course, you have to be like, never mind. And, like try to not make it awkward and let her to go back and then, repair it after class with her. And of course, that could have happened. And this is what I mean when I say like, this class for me is as safe a space as I can get. I've really cultivated a certain kind of person who's attracted to it. And really, those are the people that come. So I don't feel like I need to mask or hide or, create a veneer for myself. I'm very real in that class. So that's a safe space for me. That moment, that choice, that was a risky choice for me as a teacher, right? She could have not liked it. Other people could have been like, is this not my class? I'm not here for her, right? But I was like, I'm going to take a risk because if it works, it's going to be magical for her. And I think feel good for other people too, especially in this country right now. There's a lot of people who are having a lot of sadness and feeling about how little they can do for other people that are suffering because we're in this, horrible political moment. And a lot of us feel really helpless and powerless to help other people. So, for the other people in class, and I didn't go through all these thoughts in my head in that moment, right? There's literally maybe 90 seconds left in class. Everybody's dancing. She's having this big moment. Let's do this. And we do it. It is a risky moment, right? Because I created a safe environment for myself to take risks.
Beautiful. So I just can't help feeling in this whole journey that you've been sharing with us so beautifully, that you now have within you some assets that you obviously did not have when you were a child and when you were first connecting in with being highly sensitive. This is going to be a horrible question. You may not like this question. If I were to ask you, what kind of assets do you feel you've built in yourself that have been most helpful for you and also for the people you work with?
There's this, I don't hate that question at all. That's a great question.
I thought it might be a bit too on the spot.
No, not at all. I feel like there's an interesting relationship and like ecosystem between humility and confidence in my intuition. So like the topic is my intuition. And so anybody that's worked with their intuition, especially with other people, I'm sure has had an experience where they doubt themselves or second guess themselves. You get this feeling or like, oh, I'm suddenly, I'm giving a massage to somebody and I'm, somewhere in their body and suddenly I get like this feeling of rage and vibration and I feel my body tense up and I'm like, whoa, something's in here. And when I was a younger practitioner, I would often second guess that, so that moment where you're feeling something, I think is an inflection point. And you can go in two directions. You can go overshoot humility, which is second guessing myself and doubting myself, in which case the sensation often just disappears. Or you can overshoot confidence and be like, oh yeah, this is the site of da 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 da, and I know exactly what's going on here, right? And I've overshot confidence, and the feeling also goes away because I've over controlled it in some direction. So for me, I think the greatest asset that has been developing over the last, I'm gonna say really just like 7 or 8 years, is finding that sweet spot between humility and confidence in relation to my intuition. And one of the things that has happened is that I've had a client who identifies as autistic. He's an adult. And my work with him has really changed this kind of leverage between humility and confidence a lot. Because you cannot be anything but perfectly authentic with him. Like you just see his body, feel it right away, and you feel him recoil when you're like trying to have an answer and trying to know what you're talking about, even though maybe you're overselling it. And because I felt like taking that hyper confidence off was needed to be off the table. Like a lot of people come to you and they want you to have all the answers and want you to be an expert. And so there's this call to try to know stuff for people because they want help and you want to be the one to give them that help. And of course your ego gets involved in it too. I want to be that great expert for you and change your life and help you in this way that nobody could help you and be indispensable. That's going to give me worth or value, right? And that's me, that's my ego, that's my wound, that's my, and I couldn't engage in any of it with this client because the minute that I started to try to like have an answer or package, he was like, woo. And so I just stopped doing that. And then his time signature, he he just seems to have so little anxiety about being at the tempo he's at. So that gave me so much permission to slow down. And when I slowed down, that self-doubt voice really went away, and my need to package it and be right went away. And then I was able to really just live in that sweet spot of intuition, which for me does work slower. And if I'm allowed to slow down, then suddenly I'm like, oh, my goodness, there's so much information available all the time. And here it all is when I slow down and look around. And we do 2-hour sessions because he knows that about himself. And so I would say if there's one thing that does feel like it exponentially increased that ability to find the sweet spot, it was working with this person.
How beautiful. Well, I think that's a wonderful idea for anyone really who either is feeling not in touch enough with their intuition or too in touch with it. You know, that thing of not being overconfident about it, but also not second guessing. And I love where you see that sweet spot in the middle. So we're starting to come towards the end of our time. So is there something you'd like to say that hasn't been said yet, or that you'd like to say more fully as a piece of advice or recommendation for anybody who wishes to deal with whether they're very, very sensitive or not very sensitive or whatever, to help people engage with that a bit more fully in a way such that their life is better for them?
Mm. Well, I think if I were to speak to people that feel like their intuition is not as turned on as they would like, is to invite them to recognize those moments where their body unequivocally knows something in even quite granular ways. So, you're cooking and you're making a pasta sauce and you taste it and you're like, something's missing. What is it? And your body is probably searching mostly for like, what is the taste profile that's missing? Salt. I need more salt in this. And so you put salt in and then you taste it again. And this whole process is not analytical. It's intuitive. You're waiting for the moment that your body goes, oh, that's perfect. And you know that moment, right? You know that like it's a very different feeling when you've hit exactly the right amount of salt on your food and you're like, that's it, right? I would really invite people to notice those that's it moments, no matter how small or mundane they might seem. That's it. That's the way I want the books to look on my shelf, or that's it. That's the belt that needs to go with this dress, or whatever it is. Because noticing and logging that sensation of that's it, is this like it got in. That's the rightness. I know what's true. And I think we can dismiss these more, pedestrian moments where we feel that and be like, yeah, whatever. That's how much salt I like on my food. No, like celebrate and notice and acknowledge and give yourself credit and log and feel that moment when your body goes, I got it, I know it. Because then they'll just get more prolific and they'll be about bigger things. And then you'll have that feeling about a relationship or a conversation or a job opportunity. You'll, these things that people ruminate over and can't make a decision and, make all these pro and con lists because they're in their analytical brain, and nothing wrong with that half of the brain. But for those people that are trying to get the other, and it's not brain halves, but that sense of our brain. And I was just thinking, like last week was kind of like feeling nostalgic, and I was thinking about some of the big decisions I've made in my life. And I was thinking to myself, feel like in a way I don't actually make decisions anymore. I just eventually acknowledge the decision that has already been made. Like I already knew what it was, and my hemming and hawing is just me like not wanting that to be the decision, or like not wanting to admit that's the decision. But I was thinking about some of the big choices I've made in recent years, and I was like, yeah, I don't feel like I actually decide things anymore. I just like come to acknowledge what the decision is that has actually existed for quite a while.
I know that feeling as well. It's a wonderful thing. Excellent. So this has been such a fantastic conversation. We've talked about so much, and I could happily carry on talking to you for hours. Has there been a favourite part of our conversation for you today, Alexandra?
Oh, I love talking about the asset. I think that was really beautiful.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a good thing for any of us to reflect on.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's just been so amazing. And thank you to all our listeners and watchers. Please do all the things that you know I'd love you to do to spread the word. And have a fantastic week. I'll see you next time. And thank you very much, Alexandra.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. It really helps if you give a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, a review, and share with your friends. If you're looking for transformational coaching or an intensive transformational weekend workshop experience, I can help with that. You can actually help the show by making a donation. Until next time, take care.